Okay, let me see if I can do this. Right. Okay, okay. Ow. Hey, hey. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel for what is, as you can clearly tell, another book haul. I have no shame, I am quite content with where I am right now, surrounded by books, trying to physically absorb me at this point. Before I get into the haul, however, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, who are ShopTagger, and I always feel that ShopTagger are just the perfect sponsor when it comes to a book haul. Like, who could be better? That's because ShopTagger is a browser add-on that you can download in order to help you save money when you're doing a little bit of online shopping. So ShopTagger gives you the option to save items from your favourite online stores, including Bookshops, in order to be alerted to when those items are discounted. So you can select whether you want to hear if they are discounted to any amount or whether they are reduced to half price, whatever price change you are interested in, and then you'll get a little email in your inbox telling you that that book might be a little bit cheaper than it was before. However, I find there are a ton of useful features to ShopTagger as well as this, including the fact that you can make various different wish lists that include items from loads of different shops. So I know on shops themselves you can often make a wish list of items you're interested in from that specific supplier, but this way you can put all your items in one place. And on top of all of that, when you get to the checkout, if you have ShopTagger installed, it will alert you to any discounts that are available currently on that website. So it will run for you all of the online codes that it can find that may help you save money when checking out on that online store. And I have actually had great success with this in the past myself and managed to save myself like 10-15% here and there right before I click that pay button. If that sounds good to you, I will have ShopTagger linked in the description box down below where you can go and download it for yourself. I would highly recommend you to. It costs you nothing and can actually save you quite a lot. But with that said, let's now get into the books. So the first two books I want to show you are two books that I bought myself from the Jacaranda website. Jacaranda is an independent UK-based publisher who are specifically focused on diversifying bookshelves via the writers and the subjects that their books deal with. They publish both fiction, non-fiction, YA and adult. And although I've never read any books by Jacaranda in the past, they were recently running a like Kickstarter / fundraiser between themselves and Nights Off, who are another inclusive publishing house in the UK, to raise money to support them as businesses because they were struggling in the current climate. And I donated to that fundraiser, but then thought, hey, why don't I also order some books from both Nights Of and Jacaranda. I actually showed the Nights Of books in my last book haul, but the Jacaranda ones hadn't come to me yet, so I now have those in my possession and I am so excited for these. Honestly, these just both sound brilliant. The first one I'm particularly excited about is Hadriana in All My Dreams by Renee DePestre. This is a kind of magic realism literary horror novel from what I understand. It came up on a lot of recommendations for sort of like classic horror by women and by women of colour that I was looking at online recently, and it was first published in the 1980s but it's set in the 1930s in Haiti, and it follows a young woman who I believe is about to get married but instead becomes a zombie, and it's rooted in the actual traditional folklore and origin of the zombie mythos, which is not something I know much about at all. I'm only really familiar with zombies from the quite like current image of zombie, which is, say, things like The Walking Dead, although I've never watched that. I feel like that's kind of a quintessential image of what we all consider to be zombies these days. But what I've learned recently is that zombies actually have a very long history and meaningful history to different cultures. So I'm interested to read more about traditional zombies, and this just sounds stunning. We then have Of Murder Muses In Me by Claudia Chibiki Revnianu, and this is one that I hadn't really heard of previously, unlike this, which had come up on some of my searches for recommendations, but the plot just sort of drew me in when I read the blurb on Jacaranda's website, so I'm just going to read that to you. It sounds a bit like a literary surrealist mystery novel. It says that when best-selling author Mark Drubenheimer is found dead in his studio, Rosalind Waterloo's world collapses. The official story is that the author committed suicide, but for his devoted fan Rosalind, there is only one explanation. Drubenheimer was murdered, and Rosalind is the only person who can expose his killer. So this one takes place in London. I'm not sure if it's going to be one of those mystery novels where it actually was suicide all along and an obsessive fan just thinks it's murder, or if she actually ends up solving the murder of her favourite author. But regardless, it sounds super intriguing and I'm so excited for both of these books. Plus, I mean, these covers. I then have 5 more books that I've purchased recently, but these are all second hand. If you saw my book haul back in May, June, I have no idea at this point, where I said that I was stuck inside, so I just kept buying books. I featured specifically the independent secondhand bookshop Armchair Books in Edinburgh, which are one of my favourite bookshops of all time, probably my favourite secondhand bookshop of all time, and throughout lockdown they have been running a Books by Bicycle service if you're in Edinburgh, and if you're based elsewhere they're posting to your various locations. And I found so many amazing books in that last book haul that I really couldn't resist just placing another order. You can scroll through their bookshelves in the same way that you would if you were in a physical bookshop, so it's really nice. It really gave me that nostalgic feeling of being in a bookshop and just randomly finding things, and that's kind of how I came across all of these books, but without further ado I will show you what they are. The first one is a middle grade book and it's Tango Wreck by Jeanette Winterson. So I don't know terribly much about this book except that I adore Jeanette Winterson. She is one of my favourite writers of all time, but I've only ever read her adult literature and I actually don't see as many people talk about the few middle grade books that she's written, but I'd be really interested to check them out and sort of see if I also am drawn to her middle grade writing. I believe that for middle grade this is quite dense from reviews I've heard elsewhere, but it also sounds slightly paranormal and fantastical. It says that when the evil Regalia Mason and menacing Abel Darkwater join the search for the Timekeeper, the resourceful and courageous Silver finds herself up against not just 2 nasty adversaries, but time itself in a nail-biting race to find the Timekeeper and save the world. This one, like I think I've already made clear, I purely picked up on the basis that Jeanette Winterson wrote it, but I'm really excited to give it a shot. I then have the Ramayana. This is actually a kind of abridged version of the Ramayana. It says a shortened modern prose version of the Indian epic by R.K. Narayan. And the reason I picked this one up it was because I saw it in their classics section of the bookshop online, and I'd recently read a middle grade book rooted in both Hindu and Indian folklore and culture, and it really made me want to read some more of the original like folklore and mythology and legends from those cultures and those histories. So when I saw this I couldn't pass it up, but it does appear to be a classic piece of ancient Indian literature, and apart from that I don't know much about it. I think through it you learn about the heroes, deities and demons of Indian folklore. It's apparently been thrilling readers and listeners since the 4th century BC, so it will be really nice I think to expand my knowledge of mythologies and ancient mythologies in particular other than Greek and Roman, which is what I am most familiar with, so I'm pleased to have this one. I also picked up The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. This is a classic Gothic novel, but it's actually quite short. I always expect Gothic classics to be quite long, and this one is one of the earliest. It first came out in the 1700s, and I'm not terribly well versed in Gothic literature. I've read a couple of pieces, dabbled in a few retellings, and recently I've actually picked up a few books inspired by Gothic literature, and that has really pushed me to want to try more of the classics. I'm not saying I'm necessarily going to love them because obviously retellings and adaptations are quite different and they're aimed at a modern audience, but I want to kind of be more well versed in the genre and get a better idea of what it has to offer and whether I'm going to enjoy it or not. So this just seemed like, given that it's a classic, a kind of early version and quite a short one, I should give it a shot. I'd sort of been considering buying it full price anyway, so when I saw it in a secondhand bookshop I could not resist. Other than the genre and the time it was released, however, I don't know that much about it, so I'll kind of just leave it there. We then have a sci-fi novel, and this is Synners by Pat Cadigan, and this is one of the Glance Science Fiction Masterworks editions. So I hadn't heard of this book previously, I didn't know anything about the author or the contents, but when I was scrolling through the pictures of the bookshelves in Armchair, I saw the spine and I recognised these spines. I'm familiar with the Glance Science Fiction and Fantasy Masterwork series, so I'm always just interested if I haven't heard of one of the authors authors published in them, which was true of Pat Cadigan. She's also one of the few women published in that collection, which is definitely quite heavily dominated by men. So I did read the blurb and some reviews of it online and thought it sounded really interesting and decided to pick it up. The back says, in Synners, the line between humanity and technology is hopelessly slim. The human mind and the external landscape have fused to the point where any encounter with reality is incidental. Now you can change yourself to suit the machines, and all it will cost you is your freedom and your humanity. I mean, I love a dramatic blurb. It was also first released in 1991, which is a year before my birth. Then lastly, from Armchair, we have Paradise by Toni Morrison. So I'm kind of shocked myself that I've never read anything by Toni Morrison, and this was the only Toni Morrison on the bookshelves in Armchair, so I thought, hey, that's the one you're going to buy and that's the one you're going to start with, based on nothing other than chance. I don't know much about this specifically except that it sounds quite heartbreaking. It deals with violence and potentially sexual violence, as well as racism in the United States. It's set in a small town in Oklahoma in the 1970s and then traces back the history of that town into the 1890s. I believe in general Toni Morrison's books can be quite dark and serious, but she also has very lyrical and evocative prose, so I am very excited to finally read my first Toni Morrison. But before I get into the books I was sent for review, I then have two gifts that were actually sent to me very, very kindly for specific reasons, and I am just incredibly grateful for. They were very overwhelming to receive and had me a little bit on the verge of tears, so I will just carry on and talk to you about them before I get emotional again. So the first two books I have were sent to me by Sydney, and she picked both of these books from my wish list because it is Pride and they're both queer stories about two women. The first one is a comic book that I have been so excited to read for a couple of years now. It is Bingo Love by T. Franklin, Jen St. Onge and Joy Sun. And it is a comic book, I think I've already said that. This is what it looks like inside. It's about two black women who meet and fall in love in the 1960s in a bingo hall, but due to homophobia and pressure from their families, they never are able to make it work, and they are sort of torn apart and follow their lives on separate paths until they are much older and they are reconnected. And I just think this sounds so beautiful and joyful, and I'm so excited about it. We then have a female fantasy story called Passing Strange by Ellen Cleggs. This one is set in 1940s San Francisco, but like I mentioned, has a magical twist. In this story, we follow 6 women whose lives intertwine through the magic of the San Franciscan landscape, and they face danger and love, and that's all I really need to know. It's also published by Tor, who are one of my favourite speculative literature publishers, so I always kind of trust what they bring out, and I'm just so excited for both of those books. Then from Anne, I was very kindly sent 3 books, one of which I've already read, and that is Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. If you want to hear my full thoughts on this, I believe it was in my most recent wrap-up video, but I thought this was brilliant. It is a young adult horror novel, and I have been living for horror and creepy stories of late, and this one was definitely that. It was even more creepy than I really anticipated it was going to be. I felt quite unnerved throughout the story and couldn't read it last thing before I went to sleep, or else I had nightmares. But it's about a group of friends, one of whom went missing a year before, and it's now a year later, and everyone in their school receives a text message that is pretending to be from this girl who died many years ago and is sort of part of local folklore. And there's this game that if you go to the forest you are supposed to play with a partner, and it's meant to reveal a hidden secret pathway. Now one of the group, who was also the sister of the girl that went missing, is convinced that this is what happened to her sister, that she went, played this game and travelled on this path that magically appears, and she ends up going with the rest of her group a year later, after they all receive this text message, to try and save her sister that she's convinced did the same thing. And of course paranormal events take place. It's very creepy, everyone is not safe, this is not a book with low stakes, and there is a lot of quite gruesome and disturbing images, but it's so captivating and a complete page turner, so I really enjoyed this one. We then have 2 middle grade books. So the first is The Wizards of Once, which is the first in a middle grade fantasy series by Cressida Cowell, and I've heard brilliant things about this. The author also wrote How to Train Your Dragon, which I have never read. I love the How to Train Your Dragon films, but I've just never gotten around to the book, so let me know if you think I should. But this is the story of a young boy wizard and a young girl warrior, brought up as enemies. But have they been so busy fighting that an ancient evil has returned unnoticed? So I'm assuming that these two protagonists must join together despite being enemies in order to save their world. And like I said, it's by the same author as How to Train Your Dragon, and I've heard really good things about it, so I am really excited to read it. And similarly, another one I've just heard incredible things about and has a beautiful cover is The House with Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. This one is inspired by the folktale of Baba Yaga. That's where the image of the house comes. If you've ever read any versions of the Baba Yaga story, she lives in this house that walks around with chicken legs, and she is a witch. And in this story we actually follow Baba Yaga's granddaughter, who, despite having been raised in her grandmother's house, presumably as a witch as well, she decides to set off on a journey to find her own path in the world. And those are the 3 books that Anne very kindly sent me, and I'm very overwhelmed with, so thank you so much to both of you. I then do have a few books I was sent for review by the publishers. First up are 4 titles that were all sent to me by Dialogue Books in celebration of Pride. All of these books have LGBTQ+ characters and themes inside them. And I actually didn't know what any of these books were going to be before I received them in the post. Dialogue just asked if they could send me a little bundle for Pride, and they were all surprises. Surprises that I am incredibly pleased with though, because they all sound brilliant, and I'd only previously heard of one of them. And Dialogue themselves are focused in particular on publishing diverse voices within the publishing world. The first book I have here is The Private Joys of Nnenna Maloney by Okechukwu Nzelu, and this is the only one that I'd heard of previously. So I was already really intrigued by this book and interested in picking it up. So, you know, obviously receiving a copy in the post was incredibly exciting, plus another gorgeous, gorgeous cover. It's all about Nnenna Maloney, the title character, who is approaching adulthood, and she longs to connect with her Igbo Nigerian culture. Her close relationship with her mother, Joni, becomes strained as Nnenna probes for information about her father, who Joni refuses to discuss. Nnenna is asking big questions about how to be when she doesn't know the whole of who she is. Meanwhile, Joni wonders how to love when she has never truly been loved. Their lives are filled with a cast of characters with similar queries about identity and belonging while grappling with the often hilarious encounters of everyday Manchester. So like I said, I was already interested in this. I've heard amazing things, like the reviews have been incredible, so really excited to pick it up. I then have the 3 that I'd never previously heard of. So the first one is XX by Angela Chadwick, and this is actually about 2 women in a relationship with one another who want to have a child, and they actually end up taking part in a sort of groundbreaking medical trial that allows 2 women to have a daughter together without the need for male genes. So they're able to use their own genes together to create a baby, a biological baby that is both of theirs, and that meets with a lot of uproar and outcry and objections, and they just want to start this family together whilst the rest of the world is kind of trying to tear them down, and they become embroiled in this whole like political debate. So I am really, really intrigued in this. It sounds like such an interesting concept. We then have This Brittle House by Niven Govinden, and this one is set outside New York City Hall when 5 mothers congregate in a protest. So they are the guardians of the Vogue Ball community, queer men who opened their hearts and homes to countless lost children, providing safe spaces for them to explore their true selves. Through epochs of city nightlife, from draconian to liberal, the children have been going missing, their absences ignored by the authorities and uninvestigated by the police. In a final act of dissent, the mothers have come to pray to expose their personal struggle beneath our age of protest and commemorate their loss until justice is served. Another one that just sounds truly stunning. And then lastly we have Permission by Saskia Vogel. This one I think is kind of a literary romance. It's about Echo, who is a young actress living on the coast of Los Angeles, grieving for her father who was swept out to sea. With no true friends and a troubled relationship with her mother, she seeks solace in strangers. Strangers like Orly, a dominatrix who moves in across the street. Through the unconventional relationship, Echo tests the boundaries of desire and discovers her own means to healing. Permission is a profoundly modern story about sex, power and loneliness. It is about people who turn to the erotic for comfort and cure, searching for an answer to the sacred question, how do I want to be loved? So all very different, but all very interesting, and all books that I'm really looking forward to reading. Again, thank you to Dialogue for sending those to me. I then have one more book that I was sent for review, and that is Hoot and Howl Across the Desert, published by Thames and Hudson. So Thames and Hudson specialise in beautiful books. They publish both adult and children's literature, but everything they bring out is stunning and aesthetically pleasing. They publish a lot of art books, a lot of illustrated books, and I'm always a fan of their new children's releases. This is a non-fiction children's picture book about animals across the desert, as you can tell, and look at these illustrations. Like seriously, just take them in. Just absorb. They are beautiful, and the reason I accepted a review copy of this is because this is exactly the kind of book I myself would have adored as a child. My favourite kind of book as a child was non-fiction, illustrated or photographic books about animals, whether they be insects or reptiles or mammals. I couldn't get enough and I pored over them all the time. All of my favourite books were in this vein, so I'm always really intrigued to see what publishers are bringing out for new generations and kind of new ways of sort of like broaching those topics for children. Again, like, have you ever seen anything this beautiful? Because I'm not sure I have. And I have had a little flick through and learn a few more facts about animals, because I really don't think there is an age that is too old to enjoy a children's picture book about animals, but if you do know any children in your life as well, this might be one that you want to check out for them. That, however, brings me to the end of this book haul. Those are all the books that I wanted to share with you. I am so excited about all of them, which I'm sure is very clear at this point in the video, but I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these or are interested in reading any of these. And thanks once again to ShopTagger for sponsoring this video. It's a massive help when it comes to supporting this channel, and they will of course be linked in the description box down below. Until next time though, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys.